The 7th anniversary really is the gift that keeps on giving, and one thing that I hope does not get overlooked by most of the player base is the buffs we're going to be getting during the 7th anniversary. And I know that some of the more recent ones that JP has gotten might be overshadowing the buffs that we're going to be getting, and again, we have some very, very strong servants releasing, you know, Summer Scotty, Summer Ibuki, Proto Merlin, Archetype Earth, even the 4 stars on the summer banners with Eris are very, very strong, but do not overlook these. A lot of these buffs are very, very nice for some of these units, especially some of the low rarity ones that you might not have even known about. You might have just not paid attention to them. And sure, most people will look at it and say, oh, well, this is just going to be an additional little bit of Saint Quartz because there are a decent bit of low rarity servants getting buffs with this anniversary, but they're not bad. They're very, very strong. So we're going to go over them in this video just to make sure that you are well aware of them. And if you don't get quite why some of these buffs are good or why some of them might be a little bit on the more, I don't want to say mid-side, but you know what I mean, just not as powerful. We're going to go over all of that in today's video. So if you enjoy daily FGO content and you love being informed, I would appreciate a like on the video. And if you find the video to be entertaining and or helpful, I would also appreciate a subscription. But let's go over this first so you can see some of the nice buffs that we're going to be getting. So starting off with the first day, one of the ones that I am really happy to be seeing is Vlad Extra, because this was my first high NP unit that I had on my account. I pretty much started my current account when Cleopatra came around, and I summoned really hard to try to just get some new units, and he was one of the first guys I pulled. So I have a little bit of a bias for Vlad Extra. You know, I didn't get Cleopatra, but I did get this guy NP4, which is really nice, and this skill was not super great. I mean, it was 18% NP damage for the entire party, which I'm sure is fine for the time, but nowadays, we're gonna need a little bit more than that, and they gave him a bit more than that. He gives a party-wide 20% NP damage buff for 3 turns and a 20% party-wide buster buff for 3 turns, with the additional ability that whenever he is attacked by an enemy, he will lower their defense by 10% for 3 turns, and he can do this up to 5 times. The reason this is kind of nice on Vlad in particular is that you can at least get some early procs of this very early on because he has his own taunt on his 3rd skill. So you're at least guaranteed to maybe not get 30% down on one enemy, but you know, if you're fighting a handful of guys, they're all going to get a little bit of that defense down, which does contribute to his own damage, but also to the entire party as well if you have other sub DPSs. So it does really help him out in a way by finally giving him a decent buster buff and a decent NP damage buff, you know, by rounding it up to 20%, but it's also party wide, and it just plays very nicely with his kit being kind of this pseudo DPS slash kind of pseudo support type servant. It's a really, really nice skill buff that I'm really happy to see him get. Jekyll and Hyde, I think, will get overlooked by a lot of people because they're just like, ah, this guy is real bummy, he's not bad. I'm telling you guys right now, after he gets this buff, that is an 80% battery while he's Jackal, this guy is not that far off from being a low rarity like crit DPS guy, because you have a very easy way to get to his own NP, so you can just pretty much immediately go into the Berserker form and start going Hamtaro on people because he's a low rarity guy. You can afford to do as a pen skill to start him off with 20%, then boom, you pop the 3rd skill, immediately you are into the Hyde form where you're getting like the perma buster buff, right? And then you're able to get like those really big stacks of crit. I wish they maybe would have fixed the crit damage, you know, because it's only 50% on the 3rd skill. If you're gonna be a face card main servant where you just want to be doing crit damage, probably you could have gotten away with giving him a little bit more, but maybe they don't want him stepping on the toes of people like Super Orion. They're like, we can't make him too good because then who's gonna summon for Super Orion? Even though I think that's a very ridiculous notion if that is the reason that they kind of went a little bit lighter on him. He does have still a 50% attack buff, which is very, very strong as long as he is Hyde, but again, he's not far off from being a really, really strong servant. You know, you can almost think of him as a baby version of Super Orion. He doesn't provide stars and stuff for himself every single turn, which I wish they would do. But honestly, I've used him on the JP side of things, and he's very fun to use when going through the store. I mean, he's not crazy, but again, very fun to just kind of break out and use. Then, moving over to the second day, we have Medusa Lily, and then we have Diarmuid. Medusa Lily is getting a simple 30% battery, which is just kind of nice. Yes, you can potentially use her in some multi-core setups if you need somebody to be your single target. Maybe your Medusa Lancer is just really OP. She's NP5, and I don't know, maybe even Grailed to 90. You know, she's super yoked, and maybe she'll be someone that can take out single target enemies for you. But all in all, it's just going to be a nice consistency buff that sure, you could use her in 90 plus and 90 plus content. Again, yours would have to be pretty high-end, but you could get her to do that. But I think it's just going to be nice going into more CQ-oriented content. She'll have her own battery, which is just nice to have when you're not fully reliant on your supports to pretty much be generating your NP for you. It's nice if you have a little bit of self-sufficiency of your own. And again, Medusa Lily does need a little bit of work, you know. I'm sure that sometime in the future they'll go work on her second skill. But again, another one of those servants that is teetering on being a pretty decent servant if they do come back around and buff, say, the second skill. I think that could definitely help her out a lot. Then there's Diarmuid. Now, Diarmuid is just getting what I would consider something he should have had a long time ago. It's a 20% Quicken Arts buff for 3 turns, and then it's giving him 30% crit damage for 3 turns. Honestly, we probably could have just gone like 30% of the card buff, 50% of the crit damage, it'd be fine, but this actually makes Diarmuid, I would say, usable. He's not broken or anything, but he is actually capable of doing damage now. I mean, it's such a crazy thought that they shipped this guy out there. They said, yeah, we'll just give him the 50% star gen, we'll give him the dodge, and I don't know, maybe he can lower female attack by 50%. You know, I cannot believe they just shipped that guy out when they also made Ku as like a beginner servant as well, and somehow thought that they were on the same level. They were like, yeah, this is fine as a single target, yo, free-to-play unit. So now he can actually do damage, and he can actually do some pretty decent crits, which you would expect him to have crit damage. He's a quick servant, you know? Genning crit stars and doing crits are kind of their entire shtick, so Diarmuid isn't getting anything that I would say is like, oh, game-breaking or whatever. It's just, he's now a usable servant. Moving into the third day, we have Shiki getting her buff on her third skill. This is just them, I think, rectifying the oddity of the free-to-play Shiki having a battery, and then the summonable one had a heal for some reason, and then she reduced her own battery by 10%. That's still there, but now she can kind of push that off onto somebody else. She doesn't have to take the 10% hit herself. You could say if you wanted to use her for farming or for CQ content, because she is pretty decent if you want to bring her to CQs, you can now push that on like your Castoria or your Proto Merlin or something. They'll take the 10% NP loss, she'll gain a 30% battery, and the nice thing is though that even if you push that us off onto one of your supports, they get a 5k heal, which is not nothing. A 5k heal is super nasty, especially if you're doing, say, a double Castoria setup where you have no sustainability. You have survivability out the wazoo, but you have no sustain. And even with Proto Merlin, it's still pretty good because now you have an actual heal in conjunction with the raising of max HP. So it's just a very nice skill for Shiki to have, that if you do want to push it off to somebody else, they at least get a heal, which is very nice in CQs, where I think she excels a little bit better than doing farming. I mean, go figure, having a one-hit AoE NP doesn't make you the craziest farmer. And then Fergus, on the other hand, is getting, again, what I would say is a Diarmuid style buff. They just make him a bit more usable. They give him a 20% Buster buff on his second skill, while also giving him Buster crit damage of 50% for 3 turns. Again, nothing super insane. It's not like you're going to be whipping out your Fergus and he's going to be just going sick, nasty sicko mode on everybody, but it is nice. It's just a nice buff that makes Fergus a little bit more usable if you happen to really like, I don't know, Celtic mythology, you want to do a Celtic theme or something like that, you're a new player, you don't have anything else. It just raises the floor of the game a little bit in making some of the servants that are kind of not usable a little bit better for those newer players, which I always really appreciate when they do that, especially for the free-to-play guys. Then we have Summer Ushi. She is getting a pretty nice buff, I would say. Not only is it going to be a raising of her damage scaling, as it is an NP buff, but it's also giving her a power mod against lawful aligned enemies, which, again, yeah, could be better. You could say, oh, it could have been man, it could have been earth, but the fact that she just has a free power mod in general, while also just kind of being a decent servant already, helps her out a lot. Especially with Summer Scotty coming out, you know, this is going to make her life a bit easier in being able to farm, where she's going to get a little bit extra NP gain. And now she is a valid option if you want to bring her out somewhere, because again, her base damage is getting raised, but then she has the lawful power mod, which will help her out in some of those more hard stages. So again, just a nice buff for Ushi to get. And I guess it could also be very nice if you want to bring her into, say, a CQ or something along those lines, but I don't know how often people are bringing her there, even though, again, being able to remove the entire enemy party's offensive buffs is very, very nice. Then we're going to be getting one again for more of our free-to-play guys. We're getting a buff for Bartholomew, and this is a pretty nice one. So he is going to raise the entire party's critical damage to 50% for 3 turns instead of just 40%, which is kind of nice. For context, that is a waiver crit damage buff for the entire party for free, and then just charges everybody's battery by 10%. Again, just a nice little buff that he's getting while also reducing the cooldown of his skill to 5 turns. So just a nice little party team utility skill that he's getting over here. Again, does it make Bartholomew the most crazy guy of all time? No, of course not, but is it just a solid buff for him to be getting? Yeah, of course. And again, I love it when these free-to-play servants are getting solid buffs because I think it raises the floor of the game and makes it a bit easier for people that are jumping in and, it's like, oh, I don't know who to use. You have less of a chance of picking up a really bad servant and leveling him up by accident if all the servants are pretty decent at the end of the day. So again, like that Bartholomew's getting a pretty solid buff. Murasaki, on the other hand, I think he's getting kind of a sick, nasty one. They're buffing her NP, so, she gets the higher damage scaling, but then she gets the Earth Attribute Power Mod. And as you guys know, Earth Attribute Power Mod is very strong. It and Man Attribute are some of the stronger power mods in the game, because not only do you hit a plethora of servants, but it's also really good against the random free quest enemies you're going to be running into, whether it's farming, whether it's story, whatever have you. You're going to run into those power mods all the time. So essentially, she's getting a massive buff to her damage because Earth Power Mod is just great. Moving on, next we're going to be having Taiga getting a buff, which, again, this skill kind of didn't do a whole lot originally. It's just a 2k max HP buff for the entire party, and then now he's going to charge the entire party's NP gauge by 10% and give everybody a 20% buster buff. Again, stop me if you heard this before, it's not the most crazy buff, but it's very, very nice. It's just a nice thing for him to be doing, especially when Taiga himself does have some pretty decent other skills, in the ability of having the Ku-esque skill and having 2 evasion that's not on a turn cooldown. I mean, Ku has 3, but it's still kind of similar to what he's got. Having his own 30% buster buff does pretty much entail that he does have a buster mana burst of his own for 3 turns for free. And then he's also got a nice power mod against demonic enemies. Not the craziest thing, but it is just nice. Like, he's a very solid servant for starting players, especially with this 3rd skill buff. Voyager is one of the big red alert ones. This is kind of going to change quick a little bit because now you have other options aside from, say, Dante's being one of the best guys, or a Berserker Lancelot that has like higher NP investment being one of the best guys, right? Voyager is now one of those contenders because he is a neutral class, he's a foreigner, so you can essentially bring him anywhere, and now he's getting an additional 30% quick buff, meaning his damage and his looping ability are going to be going up significantly because the quick card buff is not only giving him more damage, but it's raising the NP gain of said quick cards, and it's going to make him one of those top tier contenders if you're considering somebody to being your main quick loopers. So he's definitely going to be one that you really keep an eye out for. It's probably one of the few that people have been waiting for from the 7th anniversary. That's why I think a lot of the other ones do get overshadowed, because this is one of those ones that does change the, I guess, meta landscape a little bit if you're using quick units. Giles, on the other hand, who's coming out with him, has a really goofy buff, I suppose. He charges all foreigner allies NP by 30% because, he's got Prelati's spellbook, Outer Gods, all that weird stuff that Giles is into. And then he also reduces all enemies' defense by 20% for 3 turns. And I guess gets a higher damage scaling because it's an NP buff. I mean, it's just funny. If you want to do some kind of weird Cthulhu Outer God team, you could consider slapping him on there, but you're probably better bringing a friend Van Gogh instead. But I guess it's funny, who knows? Maybe when we finally get Prelati in the game, she'll have some kind of good interaction with Giles, but this is pretty much just a gag, update that they did for him. It's just funny, but it's nothing that you're really going to be breaking him out for. It's not like Giles is crazy now. This is just funny. Saber Lancelot's getting a pretty solid one as well. He gets an NP buff that gives him pretty decent damage, right? Like, Lancelot's kind of known for not doing the craziest amount of damage, so they raise the damage scaling, give him pierce defense on his NP, and then now instead of stacking only 1,000 increased damage taken for 5 turns, he does it for 2,000, which, again, not the craziest thing. The damage taken doesn't really seem to do that much extra damage in my opinion, but it does raise the floor of how much he's able to do. His damage actually is fairly decent after he gets this buff. But again, it's not like he's game-breakingly broken now. It's just, hey, if you were going to use Lancelot Saber, he went from being like a 6.5 out of 10 to being like a 7 out of 10. Like, I know he's like really solid. Those aren't like actual numbers. Don't take those to heart. But, just an example. He gets a little bit of a buff. It just makes him slightly better. But if you were going to use him, you were going to use him anyway. And then finally, there's Paul Bunyan, who really doesn't get anything. They just increased the defense down from 10% for 5 turns to 20% for 5 turns. I mean, Bunyan's more of a, I don't want to say a gag servant anyway, so it doesn't really bother me, but it is just kind of a nothing burger. It really does remind me of when they buffed Li Shuin, the Assassin one's NP, and they literally didn't change anything. And those are always the buffs that I really don't like, because then it almost feels a little bit wasted, because it's like, dog, you could have chucked anything else on there. I don't know, let her bomb some stars, let her charge the entire party's NP gauge, give everybody crit damage. Even debuffing the enemy with, say, like burn, poison, curse, whatever you wanted to give her, that would be even better, because then it would have some niche applicability in some certain team comps and in certain fights where damage over time is actually really good. So yeah, hers I think is very unfortunate. At least Giles is funny. I mean, his isn't like crazy either, but it's like a funny lore skill. Bunyan, they just said, nah, we're gonna do the bare minimum with this one. But that's really the only one that I have really big gripes with, because even other ones like, say, Lancelot or Diarmuid or, say, Tauta, they get very simple buffs. It's just nice for them, you know, it makes them a bit more usable, especially in the case of Lancelot. It does target and fix one of the areas that he was struggling with damage, but Bunyan's a little bit disappointed. But let me know which one you're looking forward to the most in the comments down below. I know for me personally, I can't wait to break my boy out. I can't wait to use Vlad Lancer again. It has been such a long time since I've had the pleasure of getting to use him, so it'll feel like just dusting off an old friend and finally being like, come on, buddy, there's evil people to be killed, so get on out there, let's take some guys out, which, with Lost Build 7 coming out, you know, I'm sure there's going to be some evil enemies that I could throw him out and hopefully take out, or he's just going to get splattered and I'll cry. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice one, and I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace.